No. No. Okay.
I know all of you want to go and
Yeah, everyone was.
go and attend this exhibition, right? How many of you want to go and attend the exhibition? Okay. I will take the attendance first, and then you guys. But if Muntasir comes, oh, you are recording. I'm sorry. Sorry. Nothing in progress. See that? Yeah. And then anybody listening to this recording will say, what is happening in Dr. Alhamdulillah, yeah. On the boys' side, it's recording. You know what happened? At some point in time, there was something on the slide and I felt silent. I became silent. Everybody was laughing. Nobody would know the joke. Why was everybody laughing? I honestly don't remember what happened. I've been in lectures since 9 years. First you guys, boys' side, and then the college of pharmacy, and then again, mashallah. So my mind is kind of, whatever is coming is coming. Well, I just leave. Okay, so the first step was vasoconstriction. This is just a recap because people are still walking in, kind of drowsy after eating so much and from all this rolls. Then we discussed the role of endothelium. Usually it is anticoagulant in properties. It inhibits thrombosis. But whenever there is injury, it is going to convert to a procoagulant effect because of the release of tissue factor. We discussed the primary hemostasis, which entailed platelets adhering to the vessel wall, undergoing a shape change, releasing their granule contents, then platelet aggregation, finally leading to the formation of a platelet plug. We discussed some of the abnormalities like deficiency of glycoprotein 1b, Bernard-Soulier syndrome, or glycoprotein 2b3, the Laffen thrombocythemia. And we also said that a number of drugs are targeted towards prevention of platelet aggregation by inhibiting the glycoprotein 2b3A synthesis. And others like aspirin inhibits thromboxane. A2. Okay, then we said, we discussed secondary hemostasis, which comprised of the formation of the fibrin plug. We discussed that there was an extrinsic pathway, the intrinsic pathway, and the common pathway. All of them led to the formation of fibrin. And then the factor 13 act on it to make it stronger. We discussed the importance of laboratory investigation like prothrombin time INR and what it means in clinical scenarios, the importance of a raised APTT, or if both of them are raised. We discussed all of these things last time. And then we discussed the central role of thrombin, which has a really important role because it activates fibrin, it activates factor 13, and it activates platelet aggregation by promoting thromboxane A2 secretion. So it has a really central role in all of the clotting cascade. Then we discussed cascade inhibition by tissue factor pathway inhibitor, protein C, protein S, antithrombin 3, and clot lysis, which was mediated by plasmin. And plasmin was made by the conversion of plasminogen by the action of tissue plasminogen activator. That led to the formation of fibrin degradation products, and one of the FPPs was D9. Very good. At least somebody is doing the PBL right. Okay. We also discussed the importance in the context if these proteins are deficient, like protein C is deficient or protein S is deficient, then it can lead to thrombotic states that we call thrombophilia. Okay, and a number of drugs are used to target these. For example, warfarin. There are some hidden slides, so the warfarin mechanism action is given there if you are interested. But warfarin targets vitamin K dependent carboxylation. Factor 2, 7, 9, 10. Guys, well, don't fight. You don't need to fight. They are fighting. I, this is only way you should do. And heparin that binds antithrombin C and potentiates or increases action by 1000-fold, thereby inhibiting the clotting cascade. Then, yes, did we leave here? No. Yeah, go ahead. Factors like 2, 7, 9, 10, protein C and S. They are all vitamin K dependent factors. Okay. Momo, for you, there is a slide. You can see there is a hidden slide there, which I'm not covering. Don't worry. I know some students will be. Okay, then we started discussing thrombosis, and we said that there is something that we call Virchow's triad that comprises of endothelial injury, abnormal blood flow, and hypercoagulability. Tell me where I stopped last time. Oh, it's here? Okay, I stopped a little bit farther on the boys' side. I wonder why that happened. What was this difference? Maybe they didn't ask questions and you guys did? That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so endothelial injury basically can lead to the release of factor, tissue factor. This is going to bind to factor 7, leading to the formation of tissue factor 7A complex. So this is basically how it happens. It produces more covalent factors. It promotes platelet adhesion, and it then synthesizes less anticoagulant factors like thrombomodulin, EGI2. Example is atherosclerosis. Okay, normal blood flow is laminar. Laminar blood flow means that the cells are in the center and the plasma is at the periphery. And the reason for that is that it prevents the platelets from coming into contact with the endothelium. It prevents the platelets or other cells from coming into contact with the endothelium. But two things can happen. It can lead to turbulence or it can lead to stasis. It can lead to turbulence, and I told you this joke about turbulence in first year, remember? When I start saying it, you will remember it. Because boys said, Dr. Nan, you have told us that. Much to study. Okay, fine. So turbulence contributes to basically because of, I will show you a picture also, because the blood is flowing in all directions, it gives chance for the platelets to come into contact with endothelium, and that can start the platelet aggregation and adhesion. And then there is also some local pockets of stasis, and I will show you in a picture, because a picture is worth a. See, mashallah, you know all my jokes. Now, stasis happens after immobilization. If somebody is taking a long flight and they're sitting down and watching one movie and then another movie and then another movie and then another movie, and they're not moving around, and they have an additional factor like protein C deficiency or S deficiency, then it is very likely that they will develop a thrombotic event. Remember, in the Virchow triad, there are three things: endothelial injury, problems with the blood flow, and hypercoagulable state. There is a deficiency of protein C, S, and there are many others. A person who has one factor, like immobilization stasis, they have like 10 to 15% chance of developing a thrombotic episode. A person who has 2 out of 3 factors, they have a greater chance, maybe 50 to 60% of having a thrombotic event. And those who have all 3 of them, then they have a really good chance, like more than 90%, that they will have a prothrombotic state. Okay. Now this leads to endothelial activation, endothelial injury, disrupt aminal flow, prevent washout and dilution of activated protein factors. And example is immobilization, the one that I just gave. Okay, I will show you a picture of aneurysm in a few minutes. The hypercoagulable states will be covered. All of them will be covered, not all of them. Few of them will be covered in the EVOC block. But just to give you an example, these are rare disorders: protein C deficiency, protein S deficiency, pharmacopoeia deficiency. But just to give you an example, if protein C is not there, I want you to think a little bit. If protein C is not there, what will happen? The activated forms of factor 5 and factor 8 will not get deactivated, because that is the job of the protein C. Protein S is a cofactor in this inactivation. Now, if protein C is not there, the activated forms of factor 5 and factor 8 will remain activated, and they will keep on forming the flow. Is this clear? So that reason becomes a hypercoagulable state. Now let me ask you a question, because much of you are doing it. Will there be any? Let's forget this. Will there be any change in the peak inhibitivity? Can you see that? No. There will be no change. There will be no change. Okay, because the protein C and S deficiencies are not diagnosed with peak inhibitivity, because they are measuring the fibrin rod formation. They cannot measure whether protein C has a absent we can measure protein C in S levels, and then their molecules. So there are no change in the PT and P. Okay, one more example, which inshallah we will cover in 2 months as well. Just to give you an example. The first one is known as factor 5 Leiden. If you understand it, fine. If you don't, just to try to explain the concept. Leiden is a city in the Netherlands, Holland, where this was discovered. Factor 5, in factor 5 Leiden, what happens? The factor 5, which is there in normal people, it becomes due to the underlying mutation, it becomes resistant to inactivation by protein C. Factor 5 is there, but due to the underlying mutation, inherited mutation, known as factor 5 Leiden mutation, it becomes resistant to inactivation or digestion by protein C. So protein C cannot digest it. Protein C cannot inactivate it. So if factor 5A, which A stands for activated, cannot be digested or cannot be inactivated by its inactivating factor, then does that going to lead to a prothrombotic state?
Yes.
That's the concept.
So ATP.
No. None of the prothrombotic, none of these are going to lead to any change in PT and AV. Okay, none of these. Okay, how does a thrombus form? This is normal, but if there is loss of endothelial cells or endothelial injury due to any number of factors, the platelet will get attracted to that site. The platelet adhesion will form, and then more and more platelet will get deposited. It will provide a phospholipid surface. The clotting cascade will start. The fibrin will form, and then the fibrin will. So layers of fibrin and platelets will accumulate at this site, leading to the formation of a thrombus. This is how a thrombus is formed. And how do we know this is a thrombus? If somebody dies and we did an autopsy on the thrombus, it will show us alternating lines of pale and dark strands. Alternating lines of pale and dark strands. These alternating lines of pale and dark strands are known as lines of Zahn or Zahn. I think it's Zahn. This is the alternating lines of pale and dark strands. So the pale ones are due to the platelet deposition, and the darker ones are due to fibrin deposition. Okay, so we call them. I will show you one more picture. This is a thrombus, and these are the lines of Zahn platelets, and so the platelets and fibrin are depositing one over the other at the site of endothelial injury. Okay, so this is going to lead to the formation of lines of Zahn in a thrombus. Okay, so they were named after this Friedrich Wilhelm Zahn, a Swiss German pathologist. Okay, now this is an aortic aneurysm. So this is an aneurysm which is like a balloon-like or ballooning of the wall of the aorta. I don't know why I'm saying it for such a long time. I could have just done this. Can you see this, please? This is the only stall I have visited today. So this is an aorta, and we have cut it and opened it like this. Okay, open it like this. When we have opened it like this, you can see there is a huge thrombus lying right here. Can you see this? Okay. Now, what kind of flow do you expect for the blood to be? It will be turbulent, right? It will be turbulent. So the blood will be going all around. Like if you have a pipe and you're gardening your garden. I know gardens are there, but some of you will have gardens, right? And this pipe develops this kind of ballooning. Then the water will be going in all directions, right? But what happens is, because there is an aneurysm and a ballooning of the wall, there will be some pockets of stasis here and here. So the blood will also accumulate. Not all the blood will flow through, because now it has become a balloon in the aorta. This is an abdominal aorta. And there will be pockets of stasis that will be present over here. So this is what is going to lead to the platelets coming into contact with the endothelium, and because the blood is flowing in turbulent fashion, it is hitting the walls on all sides. This will lead to endothelial injury, and then everything that we have discussed so far will develop, and the patient can develop this way called thrombosis. Clear? So this is what it meant. Okay. So because the blood it is going through, but it is a balloon. The aorta has balloon. It is no longer in this fashion. So some blood will remain behind. And the blood that is remaining behind will be the pockets of stasis. Okay. This is a picture of a ventricle, and you can see that there are thrombus here and thrombus here. So just an adjacent to a myocardial infarct. So what happens to a thrombus? Many years ago, by the way, I gave this as an SCQ in the POD block. Doesn't mean it's coming again. I'm not saying that. I mean, because I can tell you, but there is an SCQ on this. So all we did was give you a clinical scenario and ask what happens to a thrombus. So pay attention. Okay, it can completely resolve. Okay, it can organize into a scar. How a scar forms has been covered by Dr. Abrar. It can recanalize, so some blood will flow, some will not. And then it can completely obstruct. If it completely obstructs an artery, for example, a coronary artery, the patient is going to get a coronary infarction, myocardial infarction. Okay, coronary thrombosis is going to lead to myocardial infarction. A part of it can break off, a part of the thrombus can break off, and then we call it an ambulance. Okay, if it breaks off from a thrombus, we call it thromboembolism. The clinical term that we use is thromboembolism. What does thromboembolism means? That a part of the thrombus has broken off and it is now flowing in the circulation. Okay, it is flowing on in the circulation. So we call it a ambulance.
What's recanalization?
Recanalization means that the fibrinolytic pathway has started and it is digesting some parts of it. So the blood will start flowing. Let me finish. 1 second. Now, if this is from a vein, for example, the most common form is deep venous thrombosis, meaning thrombosis in the popliteal veins or the femoral veins in the lower limbs. What will happen if there is thrombosis in the deep veins of the lower limbs and a part of that thrombus breaks off? Where will it go? It will go to the what? It will first goes to the pulmonary circulation, it will go to the lungs. If it goes to the lungs, what will happen? We call it pulmonary embolism. This is how pulmonary embolism. If it is a part of the aorta, of the arteries, it can break off. It will still be known as thromboembolism, but then it can obstruct an artery. For example, if it goes and obstruct the renal artery, you will call it renal infarction. If it goes and obstruct the splenic artery, you will call it the splenic infarction, and so on and so forth. If it goes and obstruct the cranial arteries, brain arteries, then it is going to cause a stroke. Okay, so this is what it is. Now you can ask the question.
This is the thromboembolism.
Oh, it's coming up. We have a whole 20 slides. No, not 20. Few slides on embolism. Yeah, there are many kinds of embolism. 90%, more than 90% are thromboembolism. Thromboembolism means the concept that I'm trying to convey is when we use the term thromboembolism, it means a part of the thrombus has broken off and it has become an agent that can obstruct the downstream arteries or upstream veins. So depending upon its origin. Okay, now we have to discuss 3 disorders. We have to discuss 3 disorders because for some reason it isn't there in your chapter. Should have been this. One of them will be discussed again in the hemo block. So it doesn't mean it cannot come in there. The first one is something that we call heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Heparin-induced, so there are 2 kinds of heparin. One is unfractionated heparin, one is low molecular weight heparin. Usually in patients, I will give you one example. Listen carefully. If somebody is on renal dialysis, okay, so usually they are put on heparin injections. Now, if somebody is given unfractionated heparin, and before giving that, we do their platelet count, and their platelet count was normal. After 5 to 7 days, they develop thrombocytopenia, meaning low platelet count, then it is very likely that they have developed heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, or HIT. HIT, okay? I'm not asking you to hit somebody, but it's called HIT. Now, it is an acquired disorder, usually secondary to administration of unfractionated heparin, and the antibodies are formed against heparin and a platelet factor 4, PF4, or platelet factor 4 is a protein present on the surface of the platelets. So what will this do? These antibodies are going to come and attach to the platelets, and they will activate the platelets. Once the platelet gets activated, they will combine with each other, leading to the formation of platelet clumps or platelet clots or microthrombi. Now, since the platelets are being consumed, the patient will have low platelet count or thrombocytopenia, but this is a pro-thrombotic state. Let me reiterate. Let me explain it further. So, because I'm seeing a lot of blank faces. Let me reiterate. Usually, let me put it in a different way. Usually, when there is thrombocytopenia, in your mind, it is always associated with bleeding, right? So, low platelet associated with bleeding, but not in all cases. In some cases, if a patient has a history of being given heparin, they develop these antibodies which are directed against heparin and PF4 on platelet surfaces. They are going to lead to the platelet activation. Once platelet activate, they will aggregate with each other. The platelets will combine with each other, they will be consumed. So that's why when we do a platelet count, it will show us a low platelet because the platelets are being consumed or used up in forming these platelet aggregates or these platelet clumps. Okay, and this leads to a prothrombotic state. Why? Because the platelet clumps will obstruct the vessels, microvessels, capillaries, despite being the patient having thrombocytopenia. How do we treat it? Not part of the blog, but very simple. You will number one is stop the heparin. Who said stop the heparin? Well done. Excellent. You're all right. I can't see my eyesight is very weak. No, sorry. I just oh, why? So she has promoted herself from like 4 rows down. I will call this okay. I will call this a okay. Now, what was I discussing? Okay, so in some cases, even despite being a prothrombotic state, the patient can present with thrombocytopenia. Okay, I was telling you about the treatment. So we will stop the heparin and we will give another agent like rheumatoid heparin or fondaparinux or there are many others that we can give to treat their patient. Okay. Yeah.
So like, in the sense, it's different from GIC because
Yes, it's coming after this. We will be discussing this. How come one of the boys also asked me the same question? And I said, okay, let's discuss GIC and then we will come back to it. Yeah, wait. Otherwise, we won't be able to finish it. Remember your question or write it down. You have an Apple Pencil or something else. Is this an iPad? Oh, wow. Technologically advanced people. Okay, antiphospholipid syndrome, inshallah, will be discussed in detail in HEMONC, but briefly, it can be either primary or secondary. Primary, if we cannot identify a cause, idiopathic or primary, we cannot identify cause. If it is associated with other autoimmune disorders like SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, etc., then we call it secondary. Okay, it usually presents in patients with recurrent episodes of thrombosis. In females, especially, they will have repeated first trimester abortions due to a number of reasons, some of which we will discuss. Usually, it is characterized by the formation of these antibodies, and these autoantibodies, they attack certain proteins inside the body, and this leads to a hypercoagulable state by causing endothelial injury and by activating the platelets and complement directly. Okay, these are the clinical features usually present as repeated first trimester abortion. You will be seeing the same picture again, inshallah, next year in HEMONC talk. And this picture that is known as libido reticularis, it is due to the formation of thrombi in the superficial veins of the limbs. Under the skin, in the superficial veins, the patient is forming many thrombi, thrombus formation. So we call this clinical picture as libido reticularis. What is the libido reticularis? Libido reticularis is the formation of these microthrombi all over the body under the skin. If you want to know more, there are 1 or 2 sentences more beneath the slides. You can read it. But the usual presentation, and this is important, the usual presentation is a female, it can happen in males, this is a picture of a male, who presents with repeated first trimester abortions, okay? And they can also present with other things like thrombosis in all over the body. If it is primary, it is not associated with disorder. If it is associated with other autoimmune disorders, then we will call it secondary. The targets are protein C and axin 5 and beta-2 glycoprotein 1, and hypercoagulability is because of endothelial injury and platelet activation. These are the investigations: anti-cardiolipin antibodies and lupus anticoagulant test. How do we treat them? If they're not pregnant, we will give them warfarin. If they're pregnant and they want to conceive, we will put them on low molecular weight heparin for the duration of the pregnancy plus heparin. Warfarin is type C drug in pregnancy. We cannot give warfarin in pregnancy. For a successful conception, we can put them on heparin plus aspirin. The reason we give low molecular weight heparin like enoxaparin is because it is self-administered. They can just give it to themselves on their arm or on their abdomen at home by themselves once a week. Okay. Finally, DIC. DIC, some of it we have covered previously, is disseminated or diffuse or widespread inside the vessel activation of clotting. It is uncontrolled clotting followed by massive hemorrhage. So initially when it starts, It starts with microthrombi formation all over the body. Please remember that it is always secondary to something. It cannot happen on its own. It will usually, always secondary to some other disease leading to this, like sepsis leading to this. And I'm going to show you a number of causes. So it produces both thrombosis, and once the clotting factors and the platelets are used up, then the patient will have fulminant hemorrhage, and then they can die. Okay, widespread, and they will bleed from ears, nose, mouth, anus, everywhere. Yeah, you are a doctor, don't make that face. You'll be seeing those patients, treating those patients. Yeah, forget about seeing the pictures and making faces. Every time there is this, oh my God, that the livedo reticularis picture, it always yields that kind. So this is the list of causes. For you guys, just remember a couple of them, the ones which are circled, things like gram-positive or gram-negative sepsis. There is a disorder known as abruptio placenta, where there is, it leads to abortion and displacement of the placental membrane. Things like there is a very special kind of leukemia known as APML, or acute promyelocytic leukemia. It is a kind of acute myeloid leukemia in which the granules within the blast cells are released, and that triggers the DIC. Okay. So for you guys, and the same is the burn. So this is a very long list of disorders that can lead to DIC. For you guys, just please remember gram-positive and or gram-negative sepsis. Okay. Please, those are the ones. So if I'm going to give a question, it will most likely be in this scenario, either of a sepsis, because we have covered sepsis, we have covered shock. And we have, so in the context that we have covered, I expect you to remember. For APML, which is going to be covered, inshallah, in semester 5 next year, we will see at that time, inshallah. So initially, there will be some reason leading to inflammation or sepsis. This will lead to the activation of clotting factors. It will lead to uncontrolled thrombi formation, and this is going to consume or use up all the clotting factors and platelets. Then, because they are used up, the patient will present with hemorrhage. So initial picture will be of thrombosis followed by hemorrhage. Okay. So the coagulation factors are going to be used up at a rate in excess of the capacity of the liver to synthesize them, and platelets are going to be consumed in excess of the capacity of the bone marrow to make more platelets. So for this reason, both platelets will go down and clotting factors will go down. And what will the labs show? Lab, the laboratory investigation will show increased PT, APTT. Both PT and APTT are going to be high, and the platelet counts are going to be low. Very good. Okay, the principal mediators we have discussed previously in the shock lecture are interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, because of the activation of NF-kappa B inside the macrophages that leads to the release of this, and then this starts the complement cascade, this starts the endothelial injury. And remember that this is happening all over the body, all at the same time. So that's why it is life-threatening. It is not at one place, okay? So sepsis or anything else is going to lead to widespread microvascular thrombosis. This leads to ischemic tissue damage. Because the clotting factors are all used up, it is going to lead to bleeding. Now, whenever thrombi are going to form, the body's fibrinolytic pathway will immediately get activated, so that the thrombi that are forming can be lysed. So for this reason, the FTPs and D dimers are going to go up. Very good. Okay. So first we need a cause. Any of the reasons that I showed you, that needs to be there. So the history is most important. So history is important for two reasons. Number one, if we are suspecting DIC and we know that it is associated with a clinical condition, we should know that, right? Number two, as part of the treatment is, apart from treating DIC, we have to treat the underlying cause. Unless we know the underlying cause, we cannot treat the DIC. Like if a patient has sepsis, no amount of FFP and platelets is going to rescue the patient unless we give them broad spectrum antibiotics and other support that. So it is very important to understand the clinical setting. Underlying disease is known to be associated. These are the criteria: low platelet count, high PT, high APTT, presence of FDPs, low levels of coagulation inhibitors, and hypofibrinogenemia. Why? Because fibrinogen is factor 1. So if it is being consumed for the formation of fibrin, then the fibrin level will go down, and we call it hypofibrinogenemia. Okay. Prolonged PT and APTT low. One second. increased D dimers, which is the type of FDP, low platelet count, and then there will be microangiopathic changes in the blood film. What does that mean? Because of these microthrombi, the renal vasculature, the renal vessels will also get affected. When the red cells are passing through those renal vessels, they will either get fragmented or they will assume a shape that we call Burr cells or schistocytes, fragmented RBCs, Burr cells or schistocytes. So together, collectively, we call them microangiopathic hemolytic changes. Okay. How do we treat it? I don't think it's covered in any of the slides. Yeah, we treat it by treating the underlying cause and by giving them fresh frozen plasma and platelets because it contains all the clotting factors, fresh frozen plasma. In addition to that, at this time on the world side, we haven't even started embolism in infarction. So keep your questions to yourself and write it down. I will answer it. What was I saying? So yeah, FFP platelets, whether to give heparin or not. So heparin is needed because initially it's a thrombotic state. So it is controversial. Masla ikhtilaf. Okay. Embolism. What is embolism? Okay. So embolism is anything intravascular. It can be solid, it can be liquid, it can be gas. Okay, it can be solid, liquid, or gas that is carried by the blood to a site distant from its point of origin, and that can occlude or obstruct a downstream vessel. So this is the definition. But more than 90% of the emboli are derived from thrombus. Okay, but there are other kinds. There are other kinds of embolism that can happen. So this is the most common one. It is also very important from where it is coming. I've already explained, but if it is coming from the venous veins, then it can go through the systemic veins into the pulmonary circulation and cause pulmonary embolism. If it is arterial, it can arise from the heart or aorta, and then it can go into the systemic circulation and cause infarction by occluding like splenic artery or renal artery or brain artery, things like that. Okay. Cerebral artery. Why am I calling this brain artery? Cerebral arteries. I'm tired. Most common is thromboembolism. The others are amniotic fluid, erythematous, air gas embolism, fat embolism, and some IV drug abusers because they inject themselves with different kind of things. So foreign material also is possible. The first one is fat embolism. What is fat embolism? It usually happens in the scenario of accident, a road traffic accident. Okay, so for example, if somebody is driving a motorcycle, okay, and they get a road traffic accident and they break their bones like humerus and femur and tibia, the long bones, it contains a lot of fat. That fat can get released and can pass into the circulation, goes to the pulmonary and cause shortness of breath, dyspnea, and death. At the time of death, we can do the autopsy, and if we find this Sudan black B, I'm not at all racist. If you find Sudan black B, it stains the presence of fat in the, I didn't name it, sorry, I didn't name it. This is the name, you can Google it and see, honestly speaking. This is a special stain that we can do to stain the fat, and if this is positive, then that confirms fat embolism. Once again, usually happens after, how many of you have driven a motorcycle? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. No, motorcycle. I've never done a motorcycle. I've been on a motorcycle, but I don't think it's a safe thing. A 4-wheeler is fine. 2-wheels, I don't know. I've seen too many people dying from that. So yeah, some of my friends have. Yeah. So you are courageous people. Okay. So if they have a road traffic accident, even in a car accident, and they have fractures, the fat from the long bones can get released and can go to the pulmonary circulation and cause fat embolism. Okay, because of this emboli obstructing the blood vessels of the lung. The second is air and gas embolism. Look at this picture. Nice, huh? Yeah, I will tell you what this picture is. Air and gas embolism, let me explain it in the context of an example. How many of you have done scuba diving? Deep sea diving. Oh wow, mashallah. You are more than the boys. Only 2 boys on this side. 5 or 6. But I'm sure you did scuba diving, the snorkeling thing, right? Not the deep sea diving. But let's say if somebody is on a submarine, okay, and submarine usually goes very deep down into the sea, beneath the sea surface, and with every time they go down, there is huge amount of water above it, so it increases the atmospheric pressure. When that happens, the nitrogen, most of the air that we breathe is nitrogen, almost 70%, and air is around 20-21%. It becomes changed into the liquid form. What happened? But I'm not even telling you the bad stuff, and she's already, oh my God, what will you do? She looked at that, oh my God. Dr. Ryan is going to kill everybody on the submarine. I'm 100% sure. If suddenly if the submarine, there's an accident, the submarine comes up very quickly, this fluid form of nitrogen will come out in the form of air bubbles. Now there are billions and trillions of air bubbles which are going to obstruct the arteries and veins all over the body, leading to severe shortness of breath, known as chokes, and they will also obstruct the small capillaries in the joints. And this is going to lead to severe pain all over the body in all the joints, known as bends. The reason we call it bend is to, number one, they try to bend to overcome the pain because this oxygen and nitrogen bubbles are obstructing all the small vessels because of the sudden decompression. That's why we call it decompression syndrome. Now, the reason of this picture is it is after, in the 1880s, that was 141 years ago, by the way, am I right? Yeah. The back, they used to arch the back in a manner reminiscent of a then popular woman's fashion pose called the Grecian bend. So they had this kind of fashion. Pretty outdated, right? You know why? It was 140 years ago. Fashion has come a long way from that time. What do you mean you don't know? That was 140 years ago. So at that time, this was fashionable. Imagine doing that today. So they used to bend like this and walk like this. So that's why it was named as bends. Okay. So these are the two classical presentation, chokes and bends. Because of this oxygen, nitrogen bubbles obstructing the blood vessels all over the body. And why are these nitrogen forming these? Because of the sudden decompression, and that's why we call it decompression sickness. Okay. There is another form known as Caisson disease, named for pressurized underwater vessels used during bridge construction. It can also occur during pumping of air during laparoscopic surgery. What is laparoscopic surgery? One is open surgery, abdominal, so they can cut this abdomen and take out things. But nowadays, as the advances science, we can just put some holes, 2 or 3 or 4 holes around the abdomen, and then the surgeons are going to put the instruments, which will have a camera and cutting instruments. Why is that terrible? Become a surgeon, learn these skills, inshallah. And then they can take it out. But before they do it, they pump up air inside it. And the reason to pump air is to move away the organs from the site of surgery. Okay? So too much pumping of air can also lead to similar circumstances. Having said that, the things that you see in movies and TV, where they are removing the last drop of oxygen from the syringe before giving it to the patient, that's not going to kill anybody. Okay? You need a lot more to kill it. How much more? I'm not going to tell you. Because I don't. What are you saying?
One more drop.
No. 1 or 2 drops, 1 or 2 ml doesn't matter if you are going in. This is far more for somebody to be So I've given you an example of solid. I've given fat embolism. I've given you an example of liquid. Oh, sorry, air. This is air. This is air embolism, air gas. Erythromatous emboli can form in a plaque that dislodges a plaque, characterized by the presence of cholesterol clefts or crystals in the embolism. Okay. Now, what is amniotic fluid embolism? Amniotic fluid embolism can happen at the time of abortion. So usually there is no mixing of blood between the baby and the mother, fetus and the mother. But sometimes this fluid can enter into the maternal circulation. And if that happens, it has an immune-mediated effect where it can lead to the fetal tissue obstructing the pulmonary vessels. And this is known as amniotic fluid embolism. How do we diagnose it? At the time of death of the mother, if she dies, and if we do an autopsy, if we find babies fetal squamous cells in the lung parenchyma or in the lung vessels of the mother, then that confirms the diagnosis. Remember that it has an immune-mediated mechanism, okay, for amniotic fluid embolism. But the basic thing is that the amniotic fluid enters the mother's circulation. Usually does by preventing, by getting the delivery done in recognized good medical centers and not at home.
So doctor, the budget does not recognize that amniotic fluid.
Who?
Budget does not recognize that. Why is there an inclusion?
Because where is the amniotic fluid coming from? From the baby's cell.
So
It is going to mount an immune reaction in the mother. Okay. Finally, the pulmonary embolism secondary to deep venous thrombosis is the most common one that we usually see more than 90-95% of the cases. And it is because of the embolus breaking off from the thrombosis in the deep veins of the lower limbs and leading to pulmonary embolism. Okay. But the size of the embolus is important. If it is small, it may go unnoticed. If it is bigger, it may cause shortness of breath, severe pain in the chest. Not every pain in the chest is due to myocardial infarction. It can be other reasons. You need to remember pulmonary embolism. If it is really big, it can cause sudden death, and we call it saddle embolus. How many of you have done horse riding? Oh, mashallah. Wow, that many? Where in Riyadh? Oh, not in. Okay. Maybe some of you have. Okay. No. Those of you who have been on a horse, you know what a saddle is? It's the thing at the back of the horse, right? Does this look like a saddle? So that's why we call it a saddle. She was saying, no way. So this is a saddle, like embolus. So that's why, because you put it at the back of the horse in this fashion, so that's why we call it a saddle embolus. Okay. Remember something important, because I mentioned from the Bible that the British, they call it horse riding. The Americans, they call it horseback riding. Because American needs more instruction on where to go. That's the main difference, okay? Finally, that's all about embolism. Infarction, if an embolus disrupts the blood supply of an artery or a vein, it can lead to infarction. It can lead to the death of the tissue, and we call it infarction. Final topic, guys. 5 more minutes, inshallah. Yes, 5 more minutes. So it is basically ischemic necrosis happening because of the occlusion of either the artery or the veins. Nearly 99% of all infarcts result from thromboembolic events and mostly from arterial. Now, the things which are important regarding an infarct is nature of the blood supply. Some organs have dual blood supply, like the lungs, right? They have dual blood supply. If it develops slowly and gradually, if it is partial obstruction, not a complete obstruction, then it can give rise to collateral circulation, collateral capillaries being developed. Okay. Then where occlusion has developed and at what time it has taken to develop is very important, because every tissue in the body has a different capacity to withstand lack of oxygen because of lack of blood. Like for example, for brain, it is less than 3 minutes. For heart, 0.5 to 2 hours. For kidneys, it will take the infarction to develop and the tissue to die within 2 to 3 hours. So if we can do something within that golden period, within that time, then the patient, we can prevent the infarction or the tissue from dying. Okay. There are 2 kinds of infarcts. We call them red or hemorrhagic infarcts and white infarcts. Red infarcts and white infarcts. Red are secondary to venous occlusion. White infarcts are secondary to why? Because in arterial occlusion, the blood cannot go to the organs. So the tissue beyond the site of occlusion or obstruction is going to be white. I will show you the picture. In venous infarction, the blood cannot flow back, right? So the blood will be remaining there, and this will lead to red infarct. So this is the basic concept. Red infarcts are secondary to venous obstruction, and the white infarcts are secondary to arterial occlusion, such as, for example, in testes or ovarian vein torsion. If the testicular vein gets obstructed due to a thromboembolism, it will become red in color. It will become red in color, and because the blood now cannot flow out. Same thing happens in the lung infarction. I'll show you a picture. White infarct, such as happening secondary to myocardial infarction or ischemic infarction or renal infarction, happens due to the obstruction of the arterial supply. And because the blood cannot go towards the organ, it will lead to white colored infarct. So this is a splenic infarct. Is this arterial or venous? Alhamdulillah. And is it white? Well, actually it is yellow, but let's go. And this is in the pulmonary circulation of pulmonary infarct, but this is a red infarct. Why? Because lungs have two blood supplies. Okay. The dominant histological characteristic of an infarct is cognitive necrosis, which has been covered by Dr. Huban. Okay. Most infarcts are ultimate, except for the brain where it is going to be. Okay, yes, done good job, mashallah. This is the last slide, I think so. Is it the last slide? Alhamdulillah. So let me give you an example. In patients who are diabetic, they can develop diabetic foot or infection of the toes, for example. And then what happens is the infection will grow, the bacteria will grow over there. And if a part of it breaks off, vegetation, it breaks off, it goes into the circulation and it goes to a heart valve. Today I'm pronouncing it correctly. Not valve, valve. Then it can act as a septic infarct. It can act as a septic infarct. So it will seed the area. It will seed the area, okay, and that area will become necrotic. An example is, again, this you will be seeing and treating these patients. This is gangrene. We will say, come, bring them in. I will cut it off. I will cut off your limb. Yes, gangrene, you have to cut it off. Okay. Will you cut it off? Why not? You will. Excellent. Put her as an observer without adjacent to you. Once again, last slide, I will reiterate. Bacterial infection happening in some organ, leading to gangrene and necrosis. This necrotic tissue can break off, and this breaking off of the necrotic tissue is known as septic infarct. This will go and can seed itself in the heart valve, for example, okay? And this is an example of a septic infarction. That's it. Now you can ask the questions or you can take the attendance, your choice. Okay. And you have, mashallah, 1 week of break. After this, you're going home, right? After you attend this. But you will have 1 week of peace and solitude. We still have to come, you know. They said if you want to go on leave, you have to.